with cities and see what would include those cities' populations over 100,000. If you do it like that, you'll see that here's just an example. Blackjack, right? BLACKJACK. B equals Boston, L equals Los Angeles, A equals Atlanta, C equals Chicago, K equals Kansas City, and J equals Jackson, A equals Austin, C equals Charlotte, and K equals Knoxville. That would be absolutely devastating. All right, another fact. There are those that believe that the Illuminati published their plans in encrypted ways because it's necessary by their order to involve us in the blood sacrifice. Now, there have been cases presented where the Illuminati and the powers that be do seem to be letting us in on certain secrets through coded or subliminal messages. And a good website that does a good job of decoding these messages in the media and hidden in logos and buildings is vigilanttcitizen.com. So you may want to check that out. Okay. Another fact. In part 5, slide 8, there is another ID card picture. I did notice it was not hex code, but as far as I can tell, it's base 64. And if you take a look at that, you'll those of you who know, you'll see what I'm talking about. Another fact. Another interesting note. June 19, 2009, at 2016-55, Blackjack, the mission was a success. The public and many other watchdog groups are following the diversions that was created for that purpose. Now, there's this note, tactics were extremely efficient. 5 yes. Interesting. I have to say, you're going to need to do your homework on this so you can figure out what's going on. But there's some other things we need to be aware of. People say, well, what does an attack look like? Well, the first thing you're looking at here is a 150 kiloton bomb constructed to detonate in the heart of Manhattan in New York, at the foot of the Empire State Building. The bomb goes off without warning at noontime. It's a clear spring day with a breeze to the east. Here are the assumptions. There is no warning. The population has not been evacuated, nor sought shelter. Both measures could reduce casualties if done so. There is clear weather with visibility of 9 miles or 16 kilometers. This is an isolated attack, leaving the rest of the country free to respond. A large percentage of the daytime population is outside. That's about 25%. The daytime population density is roughly uniform at about 125,000 per square mile. And the shock wave will spread out uniformly in all directions, being minimally affected by structures. Here's what it looks like. Here's New York City in example 1. This is 1 second after detonation. As you can see right here, here's your ground zero, right here in Manhattan. Right at the intersection of 23rd and 42nd Street. Here's the East River to your right. Here's Long Island, LaGuardia Airport. Here's Central Park. Here's 125th. Here's Broadway. Blah, blah, blah. Okay? As you can see, in the bright pink section right here, you have 20 psi. Okay? Let's look at the blast wave. Alright? So you can understand what's going on here. Okay? Alright, now, at the end of the first second, the shock wave will have an overpressure of 20 psi at a distance of 4/10 of a mile from ground zero, which is here. Even the most heavily reinforced steel and concrete buildings will be destroyed. These buildings include the Empire State Building, Madison Square Garden, Penn Central Railroad Station, and the New York Public Library. Most of the material that comprises these buildings will remain and pile up to a depth of hundreds of feet in places, but nothing inside this ring will be recognizable, okay, as far as casualties. This circle here contains a daytime population of roughly 75,000. There will be no survivors. Those caught outside will be exposed to the full effects of the blast, including severe lung and eardrum damage and exposure to flying debris. Those in a direct line of sight of the blast will be exposed to a thermal pulse in excess of 500 CAL square centimeters, causing instant death. Those inside, those shielded from some of the blast and thermal effects, will be killed as buildings collapse. As far as the fireball will have a maximum radius of 1,023 feet or 0.2 miles. However, the blast effects will greatly outweigh any direct thermal effects due to the fireball. Now, moving on to our next example. This is 4 seconds after detonation. Okay? 4 seconds after detonation. Alright. As far as the blast wave, an overpressure of at least 10 psi extends out for an entire mile. Concrete and steel reinforced commercial buildings will be destroyed or severely damaged out to the edge of this ring. And that's right here. Okay? The few buildings that remain standing on the outside edge of this ring will have their interiors destroyed. Though the thermal pulse is intense enough to ignite most materials, the shock wave will likely extinguish most fires in this ring. Landmarks affected by the blast at this distance include the Chrysler Building, Rockefeller Center, the United Nations, and 4 hospitals. All these buildings will be totally destroyed, so severely damaged that they will be unusable and will have to be demolished in the cleanup. That is very unfortunate. Moving on to the casualties. Most people inside the buildings will be killed by flying debris or die as the buildings collapse, sort of like 9/11. Almost all those outside and not in the direct line of sight of the blast will receive lung and eardrum injuries to varying degrees. Those in the direct line of sight will be killed instantly by the thermal pulse. Fatalities are estimated at 300,000, with many of the remaining 100,000 receiving some form of non-fatal injury. Those people in this ring making use of New York subway system will escape with few injuries, though they may be trapped for days by debris blocking entrances and exits. So you could be finding yourself trapped in the subway system, or unable to get to the subway system. Alright, our next example is looking at 6 seconds after detonation. Okay? 6 seconds after detonation. In the next 2 seconds, the shock wave moves out another half a mile, extending the destruction out to a 1.5 mile radius. The overpressure has dropped to 5 psi at the outer edge of this ring, which covers an area of 4 square miles. Reinforced structures are heavily damaged, and unreinforced residential type structures of brick and wood are destroyed. Affected structures include Carnegie Hall, the Lincoln Center, and the Queensboro Bridge. All the named structures are near the outside edge of the ring. All windows in the structures will be shattered, and many interior walls will collapse. As for casualties, this particular ring here contains 500,000 people during the day. About 190,000 will be killed inside the buildings by flying debris. This is roughly a half of the assumed interior population. The other 190,000 will suffer varying degrees of injuries. Most of those outside and not in the direct line of sight of the explosion will escape direct injury from the blast, but may be injured by flying objects. The thermal pulse is still sufficiently intense at 40 CAL to kill anyone in a direct line of sight, approximately 30,000. Those people fortunate enough to be underground will escape with no injuries. The total number of injured will be approximately 220,000, leaving roughly 60,000 uninjured. As far as thermal effects, this region here contains the most severe fire hazards, since fire ignition and spread are more likely in partially damaged buildings than in completely flattened areas. Perhaps 5% of the building would be initially ignited, where fire spread to adjoining buildings highly likely. Fires will continue to